Welcome to Divine Justice YouTube channel. The war between Ukraine and Russia continues this week with violent clashes and warm contacts. While the number of Russian troop losses exceeds 115,000, Ukraine is trying to increase its attacks by taking advantage of the situation. The eastern regions of Ukraine are again among the most critical front lines of the war, but the waters do not stop on the southern fronts either. Russia has suffered record losses for the pressure area it wants to establish on Ukraine, especially in Soledar. The mercenaries of the Wagner Group also suffered much more losses on this front line than the Russian forces. 25% of the mercenary group literally melted away at the front lines in Ukraine's Donetsk region. Russia has suffered serious defeats not only on the eastern fronts of Ukraine, but also in the southern regions. In the Melitopol and Tokmak regions, in line with the intelligence provided by the Ukrainian partisan groups, the artillery units of Ukraine carried out attacks against the invading soldiers. Ukrainian partisan groups also carried out operational actions in the interior of Melitopol this week. All these negativities created a great indignation in Russia. Moscow's policies, especially on Ukraine's eastern front lines, did not bring any clear victory and, on the contrary, caused a great military loss. For this reason, Russian citizens believe that the war is hurting their own country and that it should end as soon as possible. Most of the soldiers in the Russian army are forcibly standing on the battlefields in Ukraine. This psychological trauma in the Russian army is also reflected on the front lines in Ukraine. Thousands of mobilized Russian soldiers have already participated in numerous anti-war protests to date. Russian commanders left the battlefield many times by abandoning their soldiers at the front and fleeing. When we look at it, the Russian army has already entered the period of collapse. The negative effects of the Ukrainian war also caused serious problems within the borders of Russia. You remember the Russian soldiers who detonated their S-300 missile system with unmanned aerial vehicles in Bryansk. Also in the Zaporizhia region, it wasn't long before a Russian commander blew up the command center with his own tank and blew up his own soldiers with it. Now the address of the fiasco is the Russian city of Belgorod. The explosion of ammunition occurred as a result of careless handling of a grenade in the Belgorod region. 3 Russian soldiers were killed, 16 wounded, and the fate of 8 unknown as a result of the explosion, Russian news agencies reported. The details of the explosion are quite confusing. A Russian sergeant commander deliberately blew up his own unit with a hand grenade in the dormitory in the base area, where the soldiers are stationed in the Korochan district of Belgorod region. It has been reported that investigations are still continuing in the case of an ammunition set exploded as a result of the deliberate detonation of the Russian sergeant's grenade. But as we mentioned, whether there was any intent in the explosion will be determined after research, because the presence of thousands of anti-war soldiers in the Russian army greatly increases these possibilities. Also, after the grenade explosion, a large fire broke out. The area where the fire broke out was 450 square meters, and it was claimed that the flames spread to other military ammunition in the armory. As a result, several more explosions were reported. It is estimated that the number of injured Russian soldiers will increase with the effect of the fire. According to various sources, the explosion occurred at the cultural house in the village of Tonanka, where mobilized military personnel was stationed. The grenade was detonated by the platoon commander, a Russian senior sergeant. The Russian sergeant took the RGD-5 grenade to gain authority in front of his subordinates, and then he pulled the pin and caused such a scandal. Such situations, which seemed like accidents at first, have actually begun to be seen very often in the Russian army, especially recently. But the Russian army does not reveal these incidents in any way, even if they are deliberate. The reason is that the morale and motivation of the Russian army, which has already collapsed, is not completely finished. As Divine Justice YouTube channel, all of our findings are created by the work and analysis of our field warfare expert team and are based on data from the US, UK, Russia and Ukraine Ministries of Defense and independent war analysis and monitoring sources. In the city of Belgorod, friendly fire situations are often experienced among Russian soldiers. Such scandals are constantly happening not only in Belgorod, but also in many military regions of Russia. Following these scandals, there is nothing left in the name of unity and order, both within the Russian army and among Russian citizens. In addition, Russia's constant changes in the military chain of command fuel the negative effects of the war and cause Russian soldiers to break away from the war with each passing day. The best example in this regard was the Kremlin administration's replacement of the commander of the Ukrainian invasion for the second time in 3 months. President Vladimir Putin has renamed the head of forces in Ukraine 3 months ago. Chief of Staff Valery Gerasimov will lead the war, which Putin calls a special military operation. General Gerasimov replaced Sergei Surovikin. In the 3 months after General Surovikin took office, attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure had intensified. In the statement shared by the Russian Ministry of Defense, it was noted that the appointment of General Gerasimov was made for the different elements of the Russian armed forces to act more organized and effectively. Some experts interpret the reassignment as a sign that Surovikin may have gained too much power. In fact, these experts are quite right about this. Surovikin was getting very strong and probably skipped Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and Chief of Staff Gerasimov while talking to Putin. For this reason, the great and dramatic change in the Russian army was made openly. The Moscow administration can easily arrange such situations. However, such inconsistency and indecision within the Russian army poses too many risks for the course of the war. These changes are very useful for the Ukrainian forces because the Russian generals, who are the newly arrived army commanders, take a certain period of time until they get used to the situations on the battlefield. During that time, the Ukrainian forces are able to make their advances much more easily. The policies followed not only within the Russian army, but also by the Wagner Group, which fought for Moscow on Ukrainian soil, have a great importance. Wagner leader Prigozhin's conflict with Russian leader Vladimir Putin in previous times also affected the course of the war. In fact, what is happening between the two right now is of much more critical importance, because Donetsk is among the regions where Wagner mercenaries are most concentrated. Currently, the two most critical front lines of the Ukrainian war are the cities of Bakhmut and Soledar in the Donetsk region. Therefore, the reopening between Putin and Prigozhin directly affects the situation in the Donetsk region. The probability of such a thing happening is very high. Even now, there are cracks within the Wagner Group. In fact, one of the top executives of the group recently turned his back on the mercenary group. Andrei Medvedev, who left the Russian military company Wagner, of which he was a senior member on 6th of July, sought asylum in Norway. Medvedev, who was stated to have entered Norway illegally last week, was transferred to Oslo after applying for asylum. The Norwegian Immigration Service confirmed that Medvedev had applied for asylum. On this subject, UDI stated that no further information could be provided for security and privacy reasons. After the file was presented to the Norwegian authorities, Medvedev was transferred to Oslo. Norwegian police reported last week that a person had crossed the Russian border and entered Norway illegally. It is believed to be Medvedev, who has been on the run since leaving Wagner on the 6th of July, according to the Norwegian news agency NTB. While it is known that Wagner, owned by Russian oligarch Yevgeny Prigozhin, operates in many countries, mostly on the African continent, the Russian military company in question announced last month that it had established a friendship and cooperation center in Serbia. It was stated that the pro-Moscow RT news portal published an advertisement in Serbian that Wagner was looking for fighters in Ukraine and encouraged people to do so. Divisions, friendly fire, and rebellions in Russia affected Moscow, the Russian army, and its citizens, as well as the Wagner mercenary group. It seems that the progress of the situation in this way will completely cut off the Russian soldiers and commanders from the war. All rights of this video and text belong to Divine Justice YouTube channel. Thank you for watching us.